Hey everyone, welcome back. Have you ever gotten curious enough about your ancestry or health to try one of those at-home genetic testing kits?
Yeah, definitely.
You know the ones where you spit in a tube, ship it off, and anxiously wait for your results?
Yeah, those are interesting.
Well, today we're diving deep into that world, but with a twist. We're not just talking about discovering a surprise great aunt or two. You sent me some fascinating research about how these tests are impacting reproductive health, and let me tell you, it gets really thought-provoking.
It really does, and it's a rapidly growing area, both in terms of the science and the sheer scale of the industry. We're talking billions of dollars and some seriously complex ethical questions.
Okay, so imagine this. You finally get that email notification. You know the one. Your DNA results are ready. You tear it open, and there it is, your genetic blueprint laid bare. But this goes way beyond finding out you're 2% Irish or whatever. This is potentially life-altering information about your health, your future children, even your very concept of family.
That's exactly right. And what this research does so well is break down all the players in this complex world of at-home genetic testing. It identifies 5 distinct groups, each with its own motivations and perspectives when it comes to using these tests, especially within the context of reproductive health.
And that's where things get really interesting, right? Because on one hand, you've got people who are using these tests to understand their own health risks,
Right.
which makes a lot of sense, especially for people who might not have a lot of family medical history to draw on, like, say, if they were adopted. These tests could be incredibly valuable.
Right. That's a perfect example of what the researchers call the health-conscious user group. They're primarily interested in gaining insights into their genetic predispositions so they can make more informed decisions about their health and future.
Which seems totally reasonable. But then you have the companies making these tests and their businesses, right? So, of course, they want to sell as many kits as possible.
Absolutely, and that's where the industry-driven perspective comes in. This group includes the companies themselves, researchers, and even regulatory bodies like the FDA. They're trying to balance this incredible drive for innovation and profit with the need to ensure these tests are accurate, reliable, and ethically sound.
It's a tough line to walk, for sure. On the one hand, you want these tests to be available and helpful to people, but on the other hand, you don't want companies making promises they can't keep or exploiting people's anxieties, especially when the science is still evolving so quickly.
It's a real balancing act. And then you add another layer of complexity with the group that's using these tests to dig into their heritage, build family trees, and maybe even rewrite their personal narratives.
Which, let's be honest, is a huge part of the appeal for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Who doesn't love a good ancestry mystery, right?
Totally. But the researchers call this group history-driven for a reason. They're using these tests to fill in the gaps in their personal stories, connect with their roots, and maybe even discover unexpected relatives. But that's also where we need to tread carefully because the narrative these tests provide isn't always complete and it's not always entirely accurate.
Wait, really? So you're telling me that my great-great-grandmother might not have actually been a Scottish princess, like the first test said?
Uh-huh. Well, I wouldn't go that far, but it is important to remember that DNA is incredibly complex, and these tests are still just providing a snapshot. There's always more to the story, and sometimes that story takes an unexpected turn.
Okay, now he's got to spill the tea. What kind of unexpected turns are we talking about?
Well, remember when Oprah Winfrey announced on her show that she'd taken a DNA test and discovered she was Zulu?
Yeah, that was a whole big thing.
Exactly. Well, it turns out a later test revealed a completely different ancestry for her. Which just goes to show that these tests, while fascinating and potentially life-changing, aren't infallible.
Wow, that's kind of mind-blowing. It makes you think about how many people might be basing their whole identity on a result that might not even tell the whole story.
It's a valid concern, for sure. And it speaks to the bigger picture of how we use these tests and the weight we place on their results.
I mean, that's a pretty big reality check, right?
Yeah.
Like, maybe we shouldn't be rewriting our whole family histories based on one test.
It definitely gives you pause, right? And it speaks to this bigger question of how reliable these tests really are, especially when we're talking about using them for more than just satisfying our curiosity about our ancestry.
Exactly. And this is where it gets even more complicated, because now we're wading into the whole realm of using at-home genetic testing for family planning. And that feels like a whole other level.
It is, and it's where this research really starts to grapple with some serious ethical dilemmas, because now we're talking about the possibility of using these tests to screen for potential genetic conditions in future children.
Which, on the one hand, you could see how that could be really valuable for some families, right? Like, if you know you're a carrier for a certain disease, You might want to be aware of that before you make decisions about having kids.
Absolutely. And that's definitely a major factor driving the demand for these tests. But then you get into this really ethically murky territory of like, are we moving towards this idea of designer babies, where parents can pick and choose the traits they want in their children based on a genetic test?
See, that's the part that always makes me a little uneasy. It feels like we're stepping into some kind of sci-fi movie where suddenly everyone's obsessed with creating the perfect offspring.
It can feel very futuristic, and the truth is the technology is advancing incredibly fast. But it's also important to remember that genetics is incredibly complex, and it's not like you can just order up a baby with blue eyes and a high IQ from a catalog.
So it's not quite as simple as some headlines might make it seem.
Not at all. There are tons of factors beyond genetics that contribute to a person's traits and abilities, but it does raise a lot of questions about where we draw the line. And that's where the fifth stakeholder group identified in this research comes in what they call the socially aware users.
Okay, so tell me more about this group. Who are they, and what are their concerns?
So these are the folks who are really thinking about the bigger picture implications of this technology. They're the ones asking those tough questions about access, equity, and the potential for discrimination.
That makes sense, because not everyone has equal access to healthcare or genetic testing, right?
Yeah.
So how do we make sure this technology isn't just benefiting a select few?
Exactly. And what about the potential for this information to be used against people, like in insurance or employment? These are all really valid concerns, and it's something the socially aware group is very vocal about.
It's like every time we peel back a layer of this, there's a whole other set of questions and challenges. It's a lot.
It really is. And it gets to the heart of why this topic is so fascinating and also a little bit daunting. Because it's not just about understanding the science, it's about grappling with the ethical and societal implications as well.
Absolutely. And it makes you realize how important communication is going to be in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And communication is key, but how do we even begin to have these conversations when it feels like the science is moving at the speed of light? It can feel like most people are just trying to keep up with the latest headlines, let alone really wrap their heads around the bigger ethical questions.
It's true. It can feel incredibly overwhelming, and that's exactly why I think this research is so valuable. It's not just about explaining the science behind these tests, but about encouraging those open and honest dialogues about what this technology means for all of us.
So it's less about having all the answers and more about just asking the right questions.
100%. We need to be asking ourselves, what are the potential benefits and drawbacks of using these tests, especially in a reproductive context? Who has access to this information, and how might it be used? And how do we ensure that these advancements benefit everyone, not just a select few?
Yeah, it's like opening Pandora's box, right? But instead of unleashing a bunch of mythical evils, we're dealing with a whole host of ethical dilemmas and potential societal shifts.
It's a great analogy, and this research really doesn't shy away from those tough questions. It dives headfirst into how all these different groups with their different motivations, the health conscious, the industry leaders, the history seekers, the future planners, and the socially aware are all kind of pushing and pulling in different directions.
It's like a giant game of tug of war, with everyone vying for influence over how this technology is developed and used.
Exactly. And sometimes you see those really interesting and unexpected alliances forming. Like you might have patient advocacy groups joining forces with genetic testing companies to lobby for expanded access to screening.
Which makes sense on the surface, but then I can also see how things get a little murky. Like, is the company just trying to sell more tests?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they genuinely invested in improving healthcare? It can be tough to know everyone's motivations.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why transparency is so crucial. Consumers need to have clear, unbiased information about how these tests work, what their limitations are, and what happens to their genetic data once it's sent off in that little tube.
It really does feel like the Wild West out there sometimes, with everyone trying to stake their claim in this new frontier of genetic knowledge. So where do we go from here? What's the takeaway for our listeners who are probably thinking, wow, this is a lot to take in?
You know, I think the most important thing to remember is that knowledge is power. The more we understand about this technology, the more empowered we'll be to make informed decisions and advocate for responsible and ethical use.
So it's not about swearing off at home genetic testing altogether.
Not necessarily. It's about approaching it with open eyes and a healthy dose of critical thinking, asking questions, seeking out reliable sources of information, and engaging in thoughtful conversations about the implications. That's how we ensure we're moving forward in a way that benefits everyone.
Well said. This deep dive has given us a lot to think about. And as we wrap up, keep coming back to this one question. If these at-home tests are already shaking things up this much, What will the future hold as this technology becomes even more sophisticated, more accessible, more embedded in our lives? It feels like we're just at the very beginning of a much larger conversation about genetics, identity, and the future of human reproduction. Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone, and keep those questions coming.